Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 338 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about cultural factors, and I'm talking about international cultures here, that may impact your team. And there's some good research out there that supports this. And I want to run you through some tools you can use if you've got a big cultural mix in your team, and just how those cultural factors might impact the individuals that you lead. So let's get into this topic right now. About 10 years ago, I was doing my MBA at university in a management role at the same time. And I came across this research as part of that study from a man called Geert Hofstede. So he is a researcher who basically specializes in cultural dimensions. And he came up with 6 cultural dimensions that he found were impactful by doing a bunch of study across the world. And those cultural factors obviously influence how people show up at work and in life in general. So what I wanted to do was share those with you today because they're actually very interesting and very useful, particularly if you have a cultural mix in your team where there's people from different backgrounds and different nationalities in your team, which is obviously super common as people move around the globe and migrate from different countries. It can be really useful to have a bit of a sneak peek on, how might that person be impacted culturally in terms of how they operate in your team. Now, one thing I want to make clear up front is this is not a perfect model that it describes everything about everyone from that culture. Because as we know, people are very diverse and they're quite unique. A lot of factors influence people, like your personality, your beliefs, your culture is one. Your motivations, your goals, your fears, your insecurities, your emotions, your health, your stress levels, all sorts of things can impact how you show up in the workplace. So cultural dimensions like the ones I'm going to be talking about today are not the perfect description of a person in your team, but they may have an impact. And it can be useful as a leader to understand what the potential cultural impact might be of some of these factors. So that's my standard disclaimer out of the way. You don't use these things to put people in a box and say, oh, you're from South Africa, therefore, I will treat you like this according to the cultural dimensions model. No, you treat them as an individual, you get to know them, and you work out how they operate that way. But it is useful to know these cultural dimensions. So I want to get into them right now. And the first one that Hofstede came up with is what's called power distance. So this is the degree to which people accept that there are different levels of power or status within a society. So in a country or a culture with a high power distance, it means that people are more likely to be respectful of other people that are in positions of power. So, for example, if I'm from a country like Japan, I generally have a higher power distance, which means I'm going to respect my manager more than in a country like Australia or the US or the UK, where the power distance is a little bit lower. So what you might see if you are leading someone who has a cultural background which has a high power distance, then you might notice that, maybe they don't challenge you as much. They don't give their opinion. They're a bit quieter because they respect your formal authority more than someone else from a different country with a lower power distance. So that's how you might see this showing up in a person. The second cultural dimension is called individualism, and this is basically an individualist society is more about everyone's interested in achieving their own goals and satisfying their own interests. And countries like Australia, where I'm from, is quite individualistic. People trying to achieve their own career goals and all those sorts of things. But in the opposite society, such as a collectivist society, it's more about the we. We come first, not I come first. So, in a collectivist society, an example would be somewhere like China, where it's collectivist in nature. And so people generally belong to cohesive groups and favor the group rather than the individual. So, what you might notice is that there's a lot of loyalty in collectivist societies, loyalty to the team or the group as a whole. Whereas individualistic, you might find people going their own way a bit more. So if you've got someone from a highly collectivist culture, you might find that they are more interested in the team and making sure the team, they have a team focus rather than an I focus, an individual focus. So you might notice that as well. So another cultural factor is, or cultural dimension, is the motivation towards achievement and success. So if you have a culture that has high achievement orientation, you basically have a preference in society for achieving things, being heroic, being assertive, and having material rewards for success. And society is sort of competitive. So a lower score in this dimension is more about a preference for cooperation, a bit more modesty, a bit more caring for people who are less better off than you and having a good quality of life. And the society is more consensus oriented instead of competitive. So, as an example, in this dimension, countries like Japan are scored very, very highly on this dimension as motivation towards achievement, whereas countries like Australia, maybe the Philippines, United States, are all sort of moderate on this dimension from what I can see here. And I will say, actually, there's a really cool country comparison tool where you can choose different countries and see how they score on each of these dimensions. And it is called the culturefactor.com. And it's the country comparison tool. And I will leave it on the show notes page. I'll put a link there. And the show notes page for this episode is thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/338. Okay. The next dimension is called uncertainty avoidance. So this dimension has to do with the way that a society deals with the fact that we can't really know the future. So should we try to control the future, or should we just let the future happen? So this ambiguity can bring with it anxiety, and different cultures deal with it in different ways. So if you have a culture that's threatened by the unknown, they often create beliefs and institutions that tries to give them that comfort. So as a few examples here, Japan, again, is very high on uncertainty avoidance. And often, they have a number of natural disasters, earthquakes and tsunamis and those sorts of things, which actually have taught the people there to respond to every contingency. Now, somewhere like the Philippines, for example, has a general low preference for avoiding uncertainty. People have generally a relaxed attitude. Somewhere like Australia is quite similar, and the United States around a similar thing as well. So it's almost like, in these countries, it's a bit more relaxed. It's a bit more, go with the flow, see what happens type of thing. So if you've got an individual in your team who's from a low uncertainty avoidance culture, you might find they're a bit more go with the flow, let's be relaxed. Whereas someone who's from a high uncertainty avoidance culture might be much more structured and want to actually control the outcome and reduce risk a lot more. So the fifth factor is, or fifth cultural dimension is called long-term orientation. Now, this is the degree to which every society prioritizes longer-term thinking or outcomes. So a culture with a low long-term orientation, so more of a short-term orientation, prefer to maintain traditions and norms, and the one with a high long-term orientation culture takes a more pragmatic approach, and they encourage thrift and effort in modern education to prepare for the future, for example. So Japan, once again, has a very, very high long-term oriented society. So they sort of see their history as a short moment in the long history of mankind. And so somewhere like the Philippines or Australia, it's quite pragmatic, and people accept that changing conditions can happen, and basically we have a tendency to persevere. And so we have more of a short-term orientation. It's moderate, but it means that compared to Japan, for example, we prioritize more a short-term thinking than a long-term view. And the final and sixth factor here, which is worth having a look at as well, is called indulgence. Now, indulgence is the degree to which you are likely to, spend money, resources, effort on things that are, considered indulgences, such as things like, cosmetics or luxury products and things like that. So indulgences. And some examples from the countries I listed as well. Japan is quite low in terms of indulgence. Australia is quite high with a score of 71 out of 100 on this website. So Australia is quite an indulgent culture where people are inclined to try to enjoy life and follow their impulses, with like a strong value based on leisure. And I could understand that, based on Australia's generally nice weather conditions and the environment we have here, you could see why that has happened over time and why that's, become a cultural dimension for us over here. So I've given you a few examples there, and there's 6 of these dimensions. I recommend you checking it out. Once again, it's called the Culture Factor Country Comparison Tool. It's really interesting. So if you've got individuals from different cultures, you might put the country in and just get a bit of a sense of how they might be impacted by the cultural dimensions that impact their particular country. But once again, do not use this as a cookie cutter, like put them in the box, this is how you are. It's just a guide to help you think about the different factors that are out there, which may help you lead people from different cultures a little more effectively. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode. I'm interested in your comments on this. When you put your country into this country comparison tool, what do you notice? Do you agree with it or do you not agree? Because culture can be quite complex. And so bear in mind also that an individual may be a mixture of multiple cultures and therefore there's no one clean answer to these things. So leave a comment on the show notes page or on Spotify. thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/338 is the show notes page. And I'd love to hear what you think about the country comparison tool and also the cultural factors. I find them really useful as a starting point to thinking about people that I'm leading. Even though they're not perfect answers to anyone, because everyone is complex and unique. Thank you for listening once again. If you enjoy this episode or the podcast in general, I'd love it if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. It helps me get the word out about the podcast and help other leaders just like you. So thank you once again for listening, and I'll be back next week.